Hello, my name's Corey and I'm here today to talk to you about some of the benefits of smaller and solar electricity platforms. As a resident of Michigan, I've lived my entire life here, and over the course of the last couple of years have really wanted to start the process of learning about what it meant to produce my own electricity. During the first few stages I looked at wind production and even purchased a small wind turbine. With little success. At that point I was really beginning the first stage of producing my own electricity, and in the last probably 8 months have began to research solar electricity. I purchased a small system about 3 months ago and began to install it, and have had quite a bit of success in what I've done, so I wanted to share that with YouTube and the people that are watching this video. Really, the first process that I began was researching. I wanted to know what size system I needed, who produced the solar panels, what I needed in addition to the solar panels, and an overall cost. Really, for myself, I was looking at starting a small system. I wanted to produce electricity in emergency situations, and really begin with a novelty type scenario. As I began to talk to friends, families, and neighbors about the process of producing solar electricity, there were a lot of questions I was being asked. One of them was, why invest in solar? Well, as I said in the beginning of this video, solar electricity to me was being invested in as a means of producing power in power outages or emergency situations. As a resident of Michigan, we experienced a very large ice storm this last December. Now, I work in the field of education and had the week off before Christmas. A week before Christmas, an ice storm hit, knocking out power to over 600,000 residents of Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana. The ice storm was so severe, many of us were trapped in our homes for several days. Unable to get a hold of a generator or anything along that lines, and with temperatures in the -30s, we were stuck in our house that entire 7-day period with no lights, no heat, no television, no communication. I was constantly going back and forth to my car just to charge my cell phone, and we were using a few flashlights here or there to keep basic lighting during the night. Being that it was winter in December, it was dark out by 4:30, 5 o'clock, and continued to stay dark close to 9 o'clock. So really we needed a lot of electricity at that time. Now, a solar panel is not going to produce a lot of electricity during the winter months, but it would have helped out drastically in that situation. Really, it was at that point, December, that I said this will never happen again, and I really pushed further into the research aspect of solar panels. Now, during that time, I did purchase a small generator after about 6 days of no electricity. We actually ended up going almost 10 days without electricity, and power, thank goodness, returned in the middle of Christmas Day. So with that said, the small generator that I purchased, which retails for about $120, it's a small, roughly 1,000 watt generator, peak wattage. I actually ended up paying almost $400 for in the midst of this power outage. And that was after contacting Lowe's, Home Depot, Target, Kmart, Walmart, Myers, numerous stores in hopes of finding a generator. So really, when I talk to these people about, why invest in solar, for me, we lose power quite a bit. And as I said, living in Michigan, we have freak ice storms, we have horrible weather during the summer, we have power outages sometimes on the clearest of days. And when we first moved into our home, we lost power roughly once a month for a period of 1 to 3 hours. Now that's improved quite a bit in the 10 years that we've lived here. But with that said, we do still, in my opinion, lose power quite a bit, maybe once every 3 months for the same period of time. Another question that comes up quite a bit is it difficult to start the process? And honestly, it isn't. If you can spend the time researching what you know, researching what you need to learn, and researching the products and process, it is very simple. Videos like these across YouTube and other video platforms are extremely beneficial. Do a little bit of reading, and in about a week, you'll learn what you need, what you don't need, and really the fundamental process of starting. In just a minute I'm going to go over the interior setup of the solar charge station. For myself, I used an old shelving unit that I had laying around to store the MPPT charge controller. It also has the inverter, battery unit, cabling, and some safety switches. At the end of the video, I do have a very generic diagram of my setup, and it'll make it a little bit more easier for you to understand what we're looking at. This unit here, though, is very little routine maintenance. I spend maybe 15 minutes every month working on the equipment. Mostly I'm just checking it over for any types of short wiring, any loose equipment, and just to check in on the battery. Really the battery, you need to be aware of what it's doing, the voltage that it's at, and you also want to be aware of the power that your solar panel is actually producing. If it's producing far less than what you originally suspected or what it's rated for, you may need to find a new location for the solar panel, and or you may need to contact the manufacturer to see what's going on and get some suggestions. I will turn on the unit in just a second. This unit is running at about 13.4 volts, which is a fully charged battery for my system. And you'll hear it in just a second, but it does make a small noise as the fan kicks on. In my setup, my inverter keeps that fan on 24/7, so that fan can be a little bit of a noise, but I do have a larger inverter to provide power for a little bit more equipment than what most people may on a size setup as this. So let me switch it on. The small beep is a test that the inverter runs to make sure there's no shortages. And as you can hear, the fan is running. And this produces enough power to power a basic LED light like this, which is very nice. They don't get hot. And it can also power things as large as a small refrigerator. I have run, for the most part, about 4 or 5 of these LED lamps at the same time. I've run, in addition to that, a small TV, cable box, and a phone modem, and then charged cell phones off this during power outages. This unit is perfectly designed just for this need. Here is the MPPT charge controller that I'm using with my setup currently. This is a small 10 amp system, which is an emergency backup unit that I use with my primary setup here. This unit was purchased online for about $45, and then it costs an additional about $15 for shipping. I say that this is an emergency one because I typically use a 30 amp MPPT charge controller. Now when you are looking at charge controllers, the MPPT setting or model is a much better alternative to other types of charge controllers. MPPT charge controllers, in a basic description, builds up a charge and then charges the battery very rapidly until the battery gets almost fully charged. Once it gets at that about 80 to 90% level, the charge slows down and it makes sure the battery is as fully charged as possible. Now there are some discrepancies with the system that may confuse some people. Right now it's indicating that the battery is at 99% charge, and that the battery is healthy by the little smiley face indicator. Now when reading the directions, this charge controller is rated to be 99.998% accurate with charging, which isn't a big deal. Most are within that area, but there are some differences between the actual charge controller that I'm using and the inverter. For example, right now the battery is set to charge to 14.2 volts. Now when I check with my inverter, it indicates that it's about 13.5 volts charge. So with that said, I trust the much more expensive and much more high-end inverter that I have to be more accurate than this charge controller. Furthermore, there was some discrepancies, I thought, when I was reading that my solar panels were only producing about 0.1 to 0.3 volts of electricity. That made me very nervous. I thought maybe, well, there's something wrong with my setup, but actually there isn't. In a basic description of MPPT, this charging unit charges the battery very rapidly until it reaches about 80%, at which point it slows down and it makes sure that the battery is more fully charged. Right now, the battery is completely charged, so this indicator shows that it's only doing a very small trickle charge, so there's not a lot of volts of electricity being needed. But as for a general description, as with most charge controllers, there's a solar panel input, a battery DC output, and then a DC load output, which I've never used in my life. I don't know any setting that anyone would want to use one. Now this is typically mounted on the exterior of the casing unit that I have, and then connects to a battery bank of 4 120 volt or 20 amp hour batteries. I will turn on the inverter and we will see what it draws the battery to. The inverter that I'm using is rated at less than 5 watts of electricity, and this again made me very nervous that, as you can see, it dropped down to about 82% of the battery. And then when I click on the light that's attached to it, it drops down even further. Now this had scared me. I thought, well, maybe my battery's starting to die even though it's relatively new. But in fact, the voltage on this unit is being drawn to a point where the battery is reading, indicating 78%. But here in just a moment, it will charge the battery back up to a full charge. Now using another format charge controller, this would rapidly jump back up to 99%, and we wouldn't have as full of a charge. But as you can see, it's very rapidly climbing. It went from about 71 up to 80%, and it'll go to 90 here in just a moment, and then 100. The total time for my solar panels to charge this battery bank, if it was completely empty, on a sunny day would be about 5 hours, or about a full sunny day. But for all intensive purposes, I will I will show you the inverter next before showing you the solar panels. Alright, now that we're down here with the actual inverter, this one is rated at 1400 peak watts and an operating wattage of 700 watts. It also has a dual charge system, which means that each plug is capable of running that continuous 700 watts with a maximum output of 1400 watts, or one individual one could do the peak wattage of 1400. This was important for me because I wanted to have the capacity to run a small portable refrigerator while powering, say, several lamps and some cell phones. As I said before, we experienced a huge power outage this last December. This system here I didn't have at the time, but if I did, I would have been able to keep our small refrigerator running, place all of our perishable foods in that, and then still have our home phone set up powering off this in addition to our other equipment. One downside to the Max SST from Vector charge control or inverters is that this little indicator light. Now I don't know why they made it like this, but it does actually consume quite a bit of electricity when we're not using the panels to charge the system. For example, at night or on very overcast days. This will actually reduce the battery in terms of what the charge controller will read by about 10 to 20%. It's not actually using that much electricity, but it is making an effect on the voltage that the system has. Now when I turn the system on, you'll see that it's running at 14.2 volts, which is only because the MPPT charge controller is charging right now because I just had the light on. And as you can see, it quickly dropped down to about 13.3 to 13.5 volts. When I push the select button, there is 0 watts of electricity being used. Now I will plug in our lamp. The lamp is on, and it's still reading 0 watts. That's because the bulb is using less than 3 watts of electricity to be powered on. Now I will turn this bulb off, and I'm going to put in a standard 40-watt light bulb. This 40-watt light bulb is a typical design. It's unlike the LED bulb, and we will see that even this inverter here with its intelligent design will reduce the amount of overall wattage being used. While using this, the highest I've seen it climb up to is 22%, or 22 watts of electricity while powering the 40-watt bulb. So it reduces it by half, but with the smart technology, keeps the light bulb operating at 100%. Oops. Really, as for inverters go, this here is going to be a smart dummy unit. And I say that because it's smart in the design that it has, but there are units that are much more advanced than this one. And for safety purposes, there is 3 emergency shut-off switches underneath this unit. I can't easily get to them to show you with the video camera, but one shuts the power off from the panels to the MPPT charge controller. The next one shuts off the power from the MPPT charge controller to the battery, and the last one turns off the electricity from the battery to the inverter. That way, and I can flick one of them real quick. That way, if I needed to plug in something large to this unit, or if I needed to take it out, which it is bolted down, that I could easily get to it in a safe and convenient way. As for shutting off the power to from the solar panels to the charge controller, that's going to be if I'm working on my solar panels, or some of my smaller ones I have taken down during expected large storms, ice storms, snowstorms, or if we've been under tornado warning, I've taken a couple of them down just because their location isn't the best. That helps prevent any damage to the charge controller or back to the solar panel. And lastly, from the MPPT charge controller to the battery is that last emergency shutoff switch, which allows me to run diagnostics on the charge controller itself. With that, I like to shut it off, and I can adjust the settings on here to how full I want the battery to charge, while also allowing it to reset the settings on the charge controller, which can be important because sometimes, like any other integrated system or computer system, it can freeze up. I haven't had that happen, but I have read quite a bit online that it does happen, and it's just where when you change the settings it won't update until the power is reset to it. But as for any problems while it's charging, I haven't heard of any. Alright, these are 3 temporary panels that I have on the back of my house. The one on the left is a 150 watt 7 volt 7.23 volt max panel. The one in the middle is a Coleman 18 watt panel, and the one on the far right is a Harbor Freight 15 watt panel. Now, I made a huge mistake starting with the Coleman and the Harbor Freight. That was when I first began to get into solar, and the cost of those 2 panels outweighs the cost of the 150 watt panel and still is over 100 watts more powerful. These ones here are only here temporarily. We had a large thunderstorm this last night, and these are the ones that I take down when there is a storm. I have 4 of the 150 watt panels, the other 3 on the other side of the house, and I can't easily get to them. But as you can see, these cables here run through underneath and run into a junction box and back into our garage. These 3 panels are primarily responsible for charging and providing electricity to our chicken coop, which actually is run for a small heat lamp and is also run with electricity for light. And it provides power to that with no problem at all. This unit I've been very happy with. The Coleman and the Harbor Freight panel actually are not set up right now and are not providing electricity, but it's difficult to see. The larger panel is run on an MC4 connection, whereas the 2 smaller panels are actually run on trickle charge, which is something that you're really going to want to stay away from when you're looking at solar electricity. I will be moving these back to a more permanent location as the weather starts to clear up. We actually have quite a bit of standing water right now, so it probably won't be until that recedes, but as I said, I've been very happy with these panels and they seem to work out very nicely. At this part in the video, I want to go over a diagram of the setup that you have just seen, starting with the 4 150 watt solar panels that I'm using. As I mentioned in the video, we saw one of them while the other 3 are on the opposite side of our house. From there, the solar panels connect to an emergency disconnect switch that's located within a junction box, and then connects to our MPPT charge controller. This charge controller is very important as it regulates the power going into our batteries and also regulates the power being used to make sure that we are producing enough electricity. From there, we connect to a diagnostic switch, which is the same as an emergency shutoff switch, which can be used to run diagnostics on the charge controller.
From that emergency or diagnostic disconnect switch, we connect to 4 120 amp hour 12 volt DC batteries. It's very important that we have the same type of batteries as we want to make sure that they are running very efficiently. From there, we connect to an emergency disconnect switch so we can shut off power to our load, which then connects to a 1200 operating wattage 3000 peak wattage inverter, or the 7 by 1400 inverter that I showed in the video. As you can see, we have 3 emergency disconnect switches, which are very important in our setup for safety. We want to make sure that we're doing everything as safely as possible, and we want to make sure that we can shut everything down when needed. This diagram also shows that 100% of the power is being produced by the solar panels. This is a completely off-grid setting. From here we can produce enough electricity safely to run a small refrigerator, several lamps, and a small television all at the same time.